So was 9/11? Was that a death trap with the World Trade Center? Was there a way for these people to even get out? So welcome back to the channel Culture Confederacy here. It's Thursday. Happy Thursday, everybody. Now, if you're new, what you see is what you get. We talk about the news of the day, try to preserve great art, music, history, and culture. And thank you again for watching and subscribing. But I found this article over at the History Channel. Now, this is funny. So I've had about 3 days, 4 days off from work, some paid vacation time. And there was like nothing on YouTube yesterday. Did you notice this? And all of a sudden, I got all of these 9/11 videos. Anybody else experience this? So I got all these 9/11 videos. So I guess I got trapped into watching all the 9/11 videos yesterday, which was kind of a good thing because I found this article over at history.com I want to share with you. How the design of the World Trade Center claimed lives on 9/11. This is by Glenn Corbett. Now, this came out back in 2018. It says here September of 2018, but it was updated recently, March 31st of this year. So I'm just going to skim through this because it's somewhat of a long article, but let's get to this. It says, hard to imagine that the disaster at the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001 could have been any worse. And yet, for one simple fact, the time of day, it would have been far more deadly. Had the attacks occurred later that morning, when the number of occupants in each tower would have swelled to nearly 20,000 fatalities, it would have been significantly higher. And can you imagine that? If this had happened later, there probably would have been far more casualties. Now, a lot of people forget about what happened back in 1993. Back in 1993, you had a terrorist attack at the World Trade Center. I can't remember if it was the North or South Tower. But basically what happened is you had these terrorists, couple of guys that rented a van over in New Jersey. They were part of this Islamic or Palestinian group of some kind. And they planted a bomb in a truck. It was time delayed, I think for like 20 minutes. They set the thing off in the parking garage, and over 1,000 people were injured, some people suffering from smoke inhalation. You had 6 people who had died that day. That was back in 93, and they wanted to get the Twin Towers again. I remember that in the news when this happened. In fact, I worked as a travel agent when 9/11 happened, selling flights, believe it or not. But I remember that being in the news. They were talking about what happened back in 1993 and that they really wanted to take down the towers. That was their whole plan. And they thought they were going to do it in 93. But because of the way the World Trade Center was designed, they weren't able to penetrate the World Trade Center. They were able to just pretty much get that area in the parking garage, which I think was like 5 or 6 stories. But people forget about that, what happened in 93. So over 1,000 people injured, 6 people who died. Far less, of course, than what we had happened on 9/11. But it goes on to say here, as many as 14,000 people could have been killed, many not by the plane attacks themselves, but by trying to exit the buildings. They would have died because of intense overcrowding in the tower stairwells, where safety experts estimated it would have taken 4 hours to get out, much longer than the building stood prior to their collapse. So one of the reasons for this, main reason, is because when these buildings were built, the way they were designed was they have the stairwells in the core of the building to open up more floor space in the building. 110 stories each. One tower, I believe it was the North Tower, was a little bit taller than the, they're both 110 stories, but the North Tower was so many feet taller than the South Tower, if you consider that you have the antenna on top. And you have, of course, the window on the World's Restaurant, which took up 2 floors, the 106th and 7th floor in the first tower, North Tower. But these stairwells were built in the core of the building, as were the elevator shafts. And they go on to talk about that here. So moving right along, most people use stairs every day, never giving them a second thought. When it comes to life safety in the event of a fire, they become one of our most critical lifelines to survival. That was especially true in the World Trade Center that day, since the elevators quickly became a non-option. So when the first plane hit, when it hit the North Tower, it pretty much went through, and I just saw a documentary about this, And they talked to a lady who was an architect, and she had the floor plans of the World Trade Center, and they outlined a plane that said you can just imagine this plane pretty much covering the core of the building. When it went in, pretty much made a beeline, so it went straight through the building to the North Tower, and because of that, it pretty much cut off the elevator system, and it caused these pipes to burst. So you had water leaking everywhere. You had water leaking down through the stairwells. You had jet fuel that was leaking down. Said there were fireballs going down through the elevator shafts. Oh, it was terrible. Absolutely terrible. As a longtime fire protection engineer and professor of fire science, and as someone who served on the Federal Advisory Board of the technical investigation of the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, I'm deeply familiar with the crucial role stairwells served that day in matters of life and death. Below some of the most important factors are at play. Here are some of the important factors that were at play on 9/11. There's a typo here. And they've got a picture of one of these stairwell signs. It says here, floor 102. There were far too stairwells. The stairs in the Twin Towers were, to a great extent, a product of their times. In 1968, as construction on the towers was beginning, New York City issued a brand new building code allowing for substantial reductions in egress capacity from the previous code dating to 1938. And pardon the background noise. There's some kids playing outside if you hear that. So we do these in one take. They are what they are. Can I talk here? So the project for this goes back to the late 30s. Well, we have this building code back in 1938. And the project for this actually started, I believe, in the 40s. But it didn't really come to fruition until the 1960s, late 1960s, and they really didn't start construction until around 1967, 1968. It appears that the building's owners, the New York Port Authority, now known as the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, took advantage of this fact, providing only 3 stairwells in the center core of each tower instead of the 6 that would have been required under the older code. So, only 3 stairwells in the center core of each tower instead of 6. Labeled simply A, B, and C, the stairwells encompassed the building's entire height. 2 were 44 inches in width, 1 56 inches in width. The fact that the building's designers wanted wide open floors without columns and other obstructions meant that the 3 staircases, bathrooms, elevators, and other service elements were all placed in the same central area of the mass 1-acre floors, as I mentioned. In the case of the North Tower, the stairs, listen to this, the stairs were approximately 70 feet apart, but in the South Tower, they were about 200 feet apart. And it goes on to say here, there wasn't on 9/11 a 4th stairwell in each tower, one that would have led from the windows of the World Restaurant in the North Tower, and another from the observation deck atop the South Tower. These 2 high occupancy spaces, each exceeding 1,000 people, needed additional egress capacity. But those code-mandated 4th stairwells, getting tongue-tied again, didn't exist because the New York Port Authority chose not to include them. The Port Authority was and continues to be exempt from actually complying with New York City's building codes. Now, my humble opinion, I think that's effed up. I think that's really effed up. Now we get into some of the materials of the building. It says here the walls were enclosed with gypsum board or drywall. So when American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower at 8:46 a.m., it bulldozed everything ahead of it as it passed through floors 93 to 99. A combination of jet fuel and building contents were ignited, resulting in a large body of fire, and the destruction wasn't limited to the burning offices and conference rooms. The plane destroyed each of the 3 very fragile gypsum board walls enclosing each staircase. I can't even imagine. Honestly, I just can't even imagine. I remember seeing the coverage. I remember seeing the second plane hitting the second building, or the South Tower, live on TV. I was in the break room at work, working as a travel agent selling flights that day. I can vividly remember, of all the things I remember from that day, I can remember hearing the sound of our receivers clicking in the office because we could not get through to New York because all the communication got knocked out once this happened. Because that antenna on top of the North Tower, that was used for radio broadcast, for communication all throughout the city. Gypsum boards here, board sheets rather, aka drywall, are among the most common materials used in buildings to construct partitions. While they provide a level of fire resistance when constructed with studs between sheets on either side, they have very little lateral strength compared with a wall constructed of concrete. But on 9/11, the drywall disintegrated on the floors of the impact zone when it was hit with the plane and building debris. So as a result, all these escape routes for the North Tower occupants trapped above the point of impact, including hundreds who were relatively uninjured, were eliminated in seconds with no way to get out. I don't understand why they didn't build these buildings with staircases on the outskirts of the building or on the outskirts of the inside of the design of the building. I'm thinking more people probably would have been able to get out. Now, you can make the argument, well, they may have not had a chance either way, but I'm thinking they probably would have had you had these stairwells on the outside, like I said, or the outskirts of the inside of the building. But in the South Tower, the situation was different as United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into floors 75 to 85 at 9:03 a.m. It too destroyed everything in its path with one important exception around the 78th floor. This is where you had the sky lobby, so occupants could switch from the express to local elevators. So you just didn't go from an elevator from the ground floor all the way up to the top. You had to get off one elevator, get on another elevator. Since it entailed large amounts of elevator hoisting equipment on the 78th floor and the floors immediately above and below it, the lobby provided a protective shield around the A stairwell. This one stairwell, while not in perfect condition, offered an option to escape from above the point of impact. Now, it talks about the firefighters. Here of them carrying this equipment up these stairwells. So the fact that the A stairwell was passable and very few individuals used it emphasizes the importance of getting such critical life-saving information to those in immediate danger. And they talk about how the 911 operators told these people to stay in place, which is what you do in a situation like that until the fire department gets there so they can assess everything. But 9/11, unfortunately, was an extraordinary event. About 15 survivors actually descended from above the point of impact in the South Tower. Had they been questioned about their egress path when they emerged from the stairwell or the stairway at ground level, their escape information could have been relayed back through 911 operators to those who were still trapped. But of course, hindsight is 20/20. So it says here, conditions got hairy. For those who found themselves below the points of impact in each tower, their escape was still a harrowing experience. They had to contend with a variety of conditions, collapsed ceilings, destroyed partitions, and the like. In some locations, water from broken water pipes rained down, and you have this mixing with the jet fuel. Now, let me get to the part where they talk about the firefighters. I'll probably end it there. It says here, these stairwells were too narrow. For many evacuees, the 44-inch stairwell width played an important role in their descent, leading to congestion. This was primarily caused by two conditions: disabled slower evacuees, an estimated 1,000 individuals on 9/11, and the counterflow of firefighters ascending the stairs on the way up to attack the fire and help evacuate people who needed assistance. In high-rise office buildings nationally, 44 inches has been the minimum required staircase width, and the way they're thinking is that your standard shoulder width is 22 inches. At the time, they thought that was the case. So you could have two people walk side by side in these stairwells or down these stairs. However, it had been known for decades that 22 inches was narrower than actual average shoulder dimension, and yet building codes, including the 1968 one, continued to use this inappropriate number. And it says here that on 9/11, this mundane fact led people to having difficulty descending the stairs. And the talks here about how the firefighters carrying well over 50 pounds of equipment while making the climb up the stairs meant they not only had to contend with exhaustion, but also had to squeeze by the terrified occupants. The need to turn sideways to let each other pass meant that both groups, firefighters and occupants, were dramatically slowed. So I thought I'd share this article with you. Don't want to take too much time with it. Trying to keep this as short and concise as I can, but thank you for being with me. Again, you can find this over at history.com. Title of the article, How the Design of the World Trade Center Claimed Lives on 9/11 by Glenn Corbett. Hope you enjoyed the video. As I said, follow me at Instagram, Jason197711. You can find me on Substack or go to X, Culture Confederacy, at Culture Confederacy on X. So keep up the culture. God bless. I'll catch you next time, and y'all have a great Thursday. Take care.